We live in a time of global transformation. The Energy Futures podcast explores how we can accelerate the expansion of clean energy technologies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. From heating and cooling our homes to moving around our planet and beyond, we bring together researchers, scientists, business leaders and communicators to exchange knowledge and try to answer one important question. How can we create a sustainable energy future for all? This podcast is produced by Energy Futures Lab of Imperial College London.
In this episode, Dr. Aidan Rhodes, a research fellow at Imperial College London and Energy Policy Briefing Papers fellow at Energy Futures Lab, explores the critical importance of resilience in the energy sector. Our guest today is with Bronwyn Bullen, an Organisational Resilience Manager at UK Power Networks, where she leads efforts to strengthen the company's ability to anticipate, adapt to, and recover from disruptions. With expertise in resilience strategy, customer insight, and business improvement, Bronwyn has been instrumental in positioning UK Power Networks as a leader in organisational resilience. Together they discuss the evolving definition of resilience in the face of increasing climate and cyber threats, how energy infrastructure can be adapted to withstand and recover from disruptions, and the role of organisation resilience strategies in maintaining a reliable energy grid.
Welcome to another episode of our Energy Futures podcast, and today we're going to be talking about the big topic of resilience. So I'm joined by Bronwyn Bullen, who's Head of Organisational Resilience at UK Power Networks, and we're going to talk about basically what resilience is, why it's important, and how it matters to you. So, welcome Bronwyn. Thank you for coming.
Aidan. Good to be here.
So, before we dive into resilience, how did you? What does your job role actually entail, and how did you become head of organisational resilience at UK Power Networks?
So my job, I'm responsible for ensuring that we have an integrated approach to the various resilience disciplines within the organisation. This is obviously very important for the type of company that we are. So UK Power Networks is a distributed network operator. What that means is we're responsible for bringing electricity from transmission that brings electricity into the UK, and then transporting it and enabling it to be transported to customers, both domestic and commercial customers, for their use. So you can imagine having resilience within this sort of a company is very important. We came to realise that in 2013, I don't know if you remember, there was a series of storms at the end of the year.
I absolutely remember the series of storms. I lost power in my house for a couple of days.
Right. Okay.
Massive floods everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. And as a result of that, I think we had a large number of our customers had lost power as well. And our response was the best that we were able to offer at that time based on the planning work that we had done. However, while a large number of our customers were back and had their power reconnected quite soon, there was still too many that went without power for a number of days.
There was an awful lot of trees down, an awful lot of villages cut off.
There was, and it made the efforts to restore power back to customers quite difficult. However, that isn't a good enough excuse. And so as a result of that, a number of the CEOs of companies like ours found themselves sitting in front of the select committee answering why this had been allowed to happen. Our CEO came out of it and decided that we would never find ourselves in that situation again. And he took the concept of resilience and brought it into UK Power Networks, which is interesting because being a largely engineering-based company, you have resilience there already.
Yes, I guess it's something that engineers do think about quite a lot.
They do, they absolutely do. And not just engineers, but other parts of the organisation as well. You've got technology resilience, cyber resilience, physical security. There are all these different nodes or points of resilience. But what was happening is there wasn't oversight of all the activities that were being put into place. So things and the approach was quite siloed. And so there was a need identified to be able to have oversight of that and try to bring those efforts together collectively. And resilience, we mustn't forget, is an output of collective effort.
Yes.
And so therefore, this role was established in 2014 off the back of that. And at the time, I came into the role then as Organisational Resilience Manager.
Yeah.
And gradually the scope of the role has just increased, and it's now more of a strategic role, which is resilience does sit in the strategic space as well in an organisation. So
the idea is basically to keep resilience going all the way through, basically make it one of the key things you're thinking about through the company. No matter where you are in the company, you're thinking about how to keep your systems resilient and your area resilient. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it's one of our top 10 strategic projects, and has been actually for a number of years, such as the importance that we actually place on resilience. And we also have a culture that there is individual accountability for resilience. So to your point, exactly, we've got to ensure that resilience isn't just something that's carried out, again, by the cyber team, by those that are looking after our asset resilience, and the multiple disciplines, financial resilience, etc. It's got to be something that is looked at within those areas, but it's got to be filtered down throughout the rest of the organisation, and everybody is responsible. Resilience exists within a system, and so if one part of that system is off balance, and that can be individuals working on site, or it can be individuals in an office, or it can actually be within that siloed activity of, let's just say, cyber resilience. If they don't integrate outside of that work and incorporate the principles, then you can undermine the overarching effort, and so therefore you want resilience as a whole.
So it's sort of like a web, I guess.
Yeah.
You have a sort of web of resilience, and if one of the strands breaks, it doesn't necessarily destroy the entire thing,
Yes.
whereas beforehand it may do. There may be when you siloed issues. So tell us a little bit about your background. What sort of skills do you need to become a head of organisational resilience?
Well, my background isn't. I went to university and studied marketing. So currently, or back then rather, there isn't anything to study with regards to resilience. But to be honest, even if there was, it's not something I was pursuing at the time.
Yeah.
I went into marketing, and after university, I decided to come over to the UK. And I did a series of jobs and eventually joined what was EDF Energy at the time. We still have EDF Energy, but this was in the distributed network.
Yes, back when they owned DNO. Yes.
That's right, yes. And 2 years later, UK Power Networks then was established, and we separated from EDF Energy. And I was in a role there that was analysing the output of customer satisfaction surveys. Okay. And I remained in that role within what was the newly established Customer Services Directorate. And just in this sort of organisation, there are job opportunities that come up, and I would jump about around, not necessarily using my marketing skills, but that's, I suppose, the wonderful benefit of being in an organisation where you can move to different types of roles and be supported.
See lots of interesting different areas, understand how it all fits together into a whole.
Exactly. Yes. And so when I returned from one of my maternity leaves, my second maternity leave in 2018, it was suggested that I move in to support the organisational resilience work at the time. I had done a number of jobs, I suppose, that gave me oversight of what was required of the business, and an understanding that, I suppose, the analytics in the background, and understanding and identifying patterns, problem solving, being able to be comfortable with concepts that you have to then develop into practice. Was also a skill.
And I guess having a sort of holistic view of the organisation as well is really important, and understanding how each bit fits together, as you said, like this web. So just before we go on to the thing, just for our listeners, just remind us which regions of the UK Power Networks serves.
So we look after the east of England, southeast, and London. So we have just over 8 million customers connected to our network.
So the energy in here is being served through UK Power Networks
wire
at some point.
Yes, that's right.
Excellent. So let's talk about resilience, because when people think about resilience, sometimes they think about reliability. Does this thing work? But resilience isn't that, is it?
No, it isn't. Reliability is something that is measurable. It's something that you can, it's got a start and a finish. It's a static measure that we actually see that is generally in response to something going wrong. And it's very largely linked to preparedness or response to a particular incident. Whereas resilience is so much broader than that. Resilience, as I said earlier, it starts up at a strategic level because it requires oversight. And if you think about resilience within the context of a system, it requires you to understand all of the risks or threats to maintaining the balance within that system. You've got to have the ability to anticipate what could set things off kilter. You've got to appreciate the relationship and the sensitivities with those points, those nodes of connectivity that overlap each other. And you've got to value the relationship that brings. And it's almost, sometimes when I visualize it, it's like a constellation map. That you're maintaining this beautiful balance within all of this, and you've got to be able to ring fence and understand what's going to come your way that could just set that off kilter, and you can't stop everything. So you can't prepare for everything. No, you can't. However, you can, and resilience is about developing those capabilities to be able to understand, absorb that initial impact, realizing that inevitably you are going to be affected. But resilience really only comes into its own when there is impact, because in the absence of that, you never know if it's just luck that you've actually come out of something unscathed, or whether it is true resilience. And so once you have that anticipatory skill set there and developed, it's about understanding how you do recover to whatever your acceptable level is, which is where then restoring back to reliable service comes in.
Yeah, that's when people think about the restore to reliability.
Yes, exactly. And then afterwards, it's about learning and not just never getting back to what you were beforehand, but improving. Resilience, the essence of it is to be transformative and to improve. So
I guess you have several phases. You have the preparation phase beforehand, where, as you say, you do the map. Then when whatever event happens to test your resilience, you restore as quickly as possible, and then you learn from what's happened, basically to improve the time for next time it happens. Yeah, and as you say, often you can only learn when things do go wrong, correct?
Yeah.
Because if things go right, then yes, what lessons are there to learn?
Exactly.
So I guess I guess major sort of areas of resilience. I mean, the storms are the obvious thing. So you have in the UK, obviously, we have storms and floods. I guess are the big dangers to electricity distribution. I mean, in other countries, you may have ice storms or heat waves or wildfires, all those sort of things. But those are the kind of areas that you're looking at. So I guess let's just take through, I assume, for example, you're preparing for winter storms this winter. So what sort of things do you think about when you're preparing to ensure the systems are resilient? What are you looking at?
So just to take it back one step, and in fact, to your point about extreme sort of heat as well, we're starting to see the pattern and the results of climate change.
Yes, of course.
We talk about winter preparedness and storm readiness, but in fact, it's evolving into extreme weather preparedness, because we're coming into, we have the summer periods as well, where we're starting to see the trend. I think 2022 was the hottest.
Yes, that 40-degree day down here.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, which did lead to some wildfires, another sort of thing.
It did. And then 2023 was the second hottest summer on record.
Yeah.
So while we do a lot for storms, we're actually seeing the need for us to prepare and evolve those preparations for extreme weather. Yeah. We're also seeing wind increase in its ferocity and the frequency of the windstorms that we get as well, high winds in the storms as well.
So are we seeing these almost going up year by year, and this is something which is not a sort of slow pattern, but something which is really becoming more and more of an issue quite rapidly?
Yeah, and I think that lines up with the narrative that we're being told around climate change. Yes, and the impact of it. I do believe we are in an El Nino cycle anyway, so we are going to see more extreme weather events. However, that aside, we were seeing these patterns increase anyway, and so
and of course, I guess as a distribution network operator, you are very sensitive to these patterns.
We're susceptible to the weather, absolutely. So we have to be ready for it. And it's interesting because the infrastructure that we have wasn't built to withstand these sorts of extremes. So it's an interesting challenge for us. But so obviously we do a huge amount of work in terms of our asset resilience and ensuring that we can withstand these extremes in the weather. But part of our preparation very largely is to ensure that we have enough people on the ground to be able to respond when it is safe to do so, obviously, that we have enough people, resources, materials in order to respond to the increased number of faults that we might get on our network. So any damage to the network will require materials.
Yeah, so wires, cables.
Which is where underlying any issues that you have generally with, say, supply chain. This is where I love then the story of resilience, being in the system, supply chain issues that you might have access to be able to scale up your requirements for materials, for example, because the storm might have been bigger than you'd anticipated and you're down in your resources. So we have to, and then you've got to go back to BAU afterwards, and whatever work you had planned might be affected now because you don't have enough materials in place. So it's about maintaining that balance within the whole system of things. And so
that's very interesting.
Yeah, so as we come into our winter preparedness, we have a look at our typical systems and structures, response structures that we have in place. We follow a gold, silver, bronze tier that we ensure everybody is stood up and ready. Any of our roles that we require, because after a big storm, you've got to go out and survey the network. You can often understand where there is damage in the network based on customer calls, but very often we have to send scouts out to go and have a look at the areas to identify anywhere where it's not safe for people to go, for the public to go, and we need to log that on our system. So we have scouts that go out. So, and in addition to that, with storms, we have, as I said, we have over 8 million customers connected to our network.
Yes, over quite a large area of land as well.
Yes, exactly. So we can have thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of customers that are affected. The Christmas 2013 storm, we had, I think it was just over 600,000 customers affected. So you can imagine the call centre and the volume of calls that you get.
Absolutely. I mean, as internet was down as well.
Yes. So you couldn't go online.
And check where.
And typically that's what we would do. You know, we try to, a key thing for us is to communicate with our customers and keep them updated, because we understand very much how frustrating it is to be in a situation without power and just not know.
Yeah, and I think this is a big thing. People get worried, people get upset, people could be frustrated when they don't have any power, they don't have any heating, and they don't know when it's going to come back. Absolutely.
Oh, we have vulnerable customers who need specialized support that we have to look after, that we have a responsibility to provide accurate information to them or to their caregivers so that they can make appropriate decisions in terms of where they need to go. So we have a structure within the organisation that when we have a storm that hits, we usually communicate with our customers in advance. When we have advanced warning of it, we obviously get our teams ready and all of our response structures internally. As I said, the gold, silver, bronze, everybody stands up and is ready to go. Once the storm hits, we then wait for it to be safe and we send our teams out. For a lot of the power cuts on our network, we are able to remotely get people back on based on the pure nature of the way a grid is designed. You can reroute your electricity supplies.
Absolutely. I guess this is getting smarter as well as we have more
It is, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so we obviously utilise that. And then where we can't anymore, or where the faults are on a lower voltage network and they're not on that remote switching capability, then we send our engineers out. We send the scouts out to identify, and we send the engineers out, and we prioritise the restoration based on customer numbers. This are those that are if we're going to restore larger volumes of customers, we prioritise those areas first, and or pre-identified customers that might be of significance, typically. So, but in advance, and part of our preparation is ensuring that everybody that has a qualification required brushes up on their training.
Yeah, so make sure everyone is prepared.
That's right. So the scouts, for example, and all other qualifications on the network, obviously those that work on the network always have their training checked and up to date. But as I said, so we communicate with our customers, and then while the storm's going on, we have a large volume of calls coming in. And so what we do to ensure that we can meet the needs of our customers is everybody in the organisation has got two roles. We've got a business as usual role that we do day to day, and then we have a storm role.
Okay, that's interesting. So basically, day to day, you might be thinking about upgrading a network, repairing,
you could be working in finance or legal.
Oh, we could do even more like that. Okay,
and then a storm hits, and you will be a call handler.
Oh, very interesting. So you actually transfer large volumes of people over, because I was going to ask. It obviously requires thousands of people working together in order to.
It does.
Recover from a major outage.
Yeah, it does. And so we have a third party, obviously, that we use as well. But then within the organisation, everybody steps up, and we all receive training in being able to read our network diagrams to the appropriate level that we need to be able to. We have then a support network that provides us with live updates of what the latest is in terms of the area that we're looking after. We are provided with information on how we can support our customers, so where customers might need to be moved into a hotel, or where we are sending food vans. So we send hot food to areas without electricity.
Yes, I remember seeing those in the 2013 storm.
Yes, we have food vans. We also have, and some of the vans have the ability to charge mobile phones, for example. And so all of this information is shared out to then what we call wider call handlers in the organisation, and it creates a real sense of I would say we're already an organisation that has quite a strong connection within the organisation and a good culture, but this really does go a long way in creating that sense of unity, and we're collectively responding to this threat, which when you come out of it, that having that mindset does a lot for resilience, because to be resilient in an organisation, again, you can talk about systems, processes, but if you don't have resilience within your individuals and goodwill with your employees, when you're asking them to extend,
do long hours.
They do, and we need to look after those individuals doing long hours, coming out of their comfort zone of what they do day to day, talking to customers that are under, for many of them, they are in a distressed state, and you've got to be able to manage that and then put the phone down, and then answer another call straight away. So the support that we provide to our employees ensures that they have that personal resilience required.
So a real sort of sense of unity of purpose, and I guess working with different people from across you really get a sense, I guess, of what the teams on the field are doing, what the teams in the call centres are doing, and a real instead of just being siloed in your finance, in your legal, in your communications roles. So is a lot of this a new culture which you've been fostering since the 2013 storms, or is this building on existing?
No, it's building on existing. I mean, the nature of what we do means that we've always been responding to storms. The 2013 storms, we found ourselves in that situation because we'd planned for the size of the storm that had been anticipated originally, and it ended up being a bigger storm. And so we had left ourselves thin in terms of resources to be able to respond quickly after the storm had actually hit. But the culture was already there. We were already doing wider call handling at that point. Back then, however, you had to travel into a nominated site to be able to support on the phones, whereas now we're set up through COVID. We set everybody up to be able to take those calls from home, which means we have access to a wider network of call handlers at a moment's notice.
Especially because that storm in 2013 hit Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas Eve. So a lot of people, I guess, would have been on holiday or away from the office. Yes.
And this is it. And this is, but that's then when the true essence of resilience comes in, because you think, and that's the difference between just responding to something and actually being resilient against a threat. Responding to it is that you look at what the threat is going to be and you just prepare for that. But being resilient is looking at that anticipatory piece that we spoke about earlier, where you look more broadly to that. You understand the system and the balance of and the role that you are playing within this and what might happen if. And that's one of my favorite questions I always bring to the organisation. What would happen if?
Something like that is happening.
And I always try and get everybody at work, and I try and say to them, part of my job is to make them paranoid. If I can make them paranoid and start thinking around beyond just their own sphere of influence and appreciating how other things, it's not just what we do and how we impact things externally, but it's impact inward as well on the things that we rely on, where we have dependencies. We need to think about that and ask, what if that wasn't available?
Yes, imagine the worst thing that could possibly happen. And how would you deal with that sort of thing?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would you, because since the 2013 storm, it was obviously 10 years ago, what in the last 10 years do you think have been the major improvements in your organisational resilience? Do you think, where have you made the big strides forward to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, so certainly we've done a huge amount of work on the culture. Previously, the approach had been, I would say, probably a little bit more siloed. I understand the thinking behind if everybody does what they're supposed to do, then everything should work.
Well, exactly.
And I think that was, yes, exactly. And I think that was the approach that everybody had. So long as we're doing what we need to do, and people were doing that, but that's not how we're going to be truly resilient. And so often you'll see within organizations and across industries that they sit up, the ones that are probably most resilient are the ones that have had something happen to them. And so often it takes a crisis or a major incident for you to realize that in fact you can't just do what it is that you've been asked to do and then that's going to be good enough. So a huge piece of work that we've done is to try and understand, and you need to build the appreciation for what resilience means and how that affects us. We all have to have resilience in our daily lives. I'm a mother to 2 little boys, and I have to raise them to be able to go out into the world of unknowns and be okay with the way that the world is going. So I don't know what those threats or risks are going to look like with AI out there and social media as it's evolving, but I've got to raise my children to be able to withstand whatever risks those events can bring along. So with it, so we all have a degree of resilience. You think about your personal resilience and your health, but it's about taking that, building on it, and helping them to realize that we are one part of a system. And in fact, your personal resilience and your family's resilience contributes to societal resilience. But you don't leave that at the door when you come to work. And even at work, we are one part of a greater, larger team. So it's changing the conversation. It was driving an appreciation of the value that resilience can bring, that it's not just about we've always done it that way and it's been okay, and so it should be okay going forward.
But as the world changes.
Because as the threats that we're seeing and the changing landscape and the volatility that we've seen over the past few years means even traditional risk models are not going to be overly reliable because it's based on historical information for future projections, but we're seeing that it's just not lining up. We're seeing risks occur concurrently on a scale that we've never had before. So having those conversations, changing the conversations, bringing it up to a more strategic level, it's an area of concern. Our directors, the board, take it very seriously. As I said, it's a strategic project and has been for a number of years now, and so it's reported at that level. Our CEO takes it extremely seriously, and so the culture is all about embracing it. What is your responsibility? What does that look like? Because resilience can be very conceptual, and if you don't bring it down into something tangible that people can relate to it
actually understand
and
where
understand
their
what
role is.
Exactly, and what it looks like, there's going to always be a disconnect. It might be a nice story to sit and listen to, but if they don't connect and engage with it, doesn't resonate with them, they'll enjoy listening and then go off and carry on as they always were. So it's driving that change.
That's very interesting. So all this work done on the resilience let's take the relatively novel hit of COVID, for example. Mm-hmm. Did the work done after 2013 help UK payer networks respond to COVID well? Because obviously, I'm sure a pandemic of some sort was probably in your risk register, but did you manage to adapt successfully?
Absolutely. And in fact, up to that point, that was our best performing year that we had ever had.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the systems and the processes that we had put in place to enable us to be agile, and that was the key thing, building in agility into the business. We had a degree of agility already, so we weren't starting out without any agility, but we matured that. And we developed and streamlined systems and processes that would support the core response, which I think previously perhaps hadn't been there. And what that meant was throughout the horizon scanning, so trying to anticipate what might come along, we had picked up already that there was an issue that was going on. And our CEO had asked us to then consider what we would do if this were to materialize into an issue.
Okay, so you've picked up that there was a pandemic happening in China or beginning to evolve.
There was something that was going on. People were getting sick and it was picking up pace.
Okay, and at that point you said, right, we need to start thinking about it. What happens if this... So this horizon scanning process is ongoing, and you're constantly looking at the news, constantly looking at global affairs. Okay.
It is, yeah. And so in fact, for COVID, by the January, we had I think it was five-tier response plan already that we then aligned. When the government released their plan, we actually adjusted our plan to then reflect theirs. So we had the same triggers and made sure our outcomes aligned with what theirs were. But we were really ready to go, and we had built an HR reporting database already, and we refined that as we went along through COVID. We were able to scale up the provision of laptops to individuals who had left the office, not taking things there. And some at that point, believe it or not, we still had some desktops, some small niche parts of the business. And so we had to very quickly get a large number of laptops out to individuals who were at home without.
And I guess having the sort of the remote working software in order for them to
exactly, their profiles had to be matched, yes. And we were able to do it, and we were able to stay on top of our individuals in terms of our fleet that were out on the road. We had to change the vans and the structure. You couldn't go out.
A bit more distancing and so on.
That's right. And for safety reasons, our engineers have to work. Some of them have to work in teams. And so we had to factor in some of the legal requirements at that time for the distancing.
Which I guess is very tough when you are looking at some of these.
It wasn't easy, but we had these. So in terms of the response, we had multiple gold, silver and bronze tiered structures that were going and occurring at the same time that would then come together to all report into the gold, the overarching gold. And it worked very well. And we had a very broad perspective across the organisation, and we engaged with all of our stakeholders, including our unions as well. We brought them into the conversation as well.
Because
that was
important. I mean, I certainly didn't notice any power cuts in 2020, so you obviously were doing something well. But yes, it's that sort of, I guess, having the resilience in your organisation means that when something like this comes along, which is maybe unlike something society has faced in the last generation, you can still prepare for it successfully. So let's talk more about the societal resilience, because I know that was something you were interested in talking about. And these sort of what happens when these large scale things happen, like for example a large scale cyber attack on your networks, or perhaps a very large extreme event which knocks out large portions of the electricity network. So what's your kind of thinking around how society should themselves be resilient?
So I always think, and I think we know that there are, so talking about large-scale outage on the power grid, previously this was called a black start. It's now been changed into something called the Electricity System Restoration Standard.
Because black start was
ESRS.
Okay, now we need more acronyms.
We do. I think we love acronyms in this industry. But the Electricity System Restoration Standard, and in those scenarios where you'd have to invoke that standard, which is formerly known as black start, these occur more frequently than what we realise.
So black start on these standards is when the network actually, I guess, crashes, isn't it? It's when
it's when large-scale parts of the network would crash, as it were. What separates a black start from a normal power cut, a large-scale power cut, is that in a typical power cut scenario, you bring power in from an external source.
Yes. So you can just repower the network from somewhere else.
Yes, but in a black start scenario, you're not able to do that. The source is either too far away to be able to bring it in, or in an extreme situation, you've lost power to the whole country.
Yeah.
So the separator is that you've got to then start the network up from the inside out.
Yeah, I mean, I think people may not know, but the network actually requires electricity from the network in order to function as a network. So if the network stops working, you need to power it up bit by bit. Generators need to power up other generators, which need to power up other bits.
It does, which brings in an interesting point when we talk about renewables, and that replacing things such as gas, which is a very good source and provides a lot of resilience to black start.
Yes, because they're more variable. And
That's right. So it's I find it an interesting challenge. Anyway, but coming back to the point of societal resilience, so these things, these black start style events or ESRS scenario style events are happening around the world more frequently than what we realise.
Really?
We only have to think back, I think there is one of these events that happen in the developed world every 2 years.
Oh, right. As big frequently as that.
Yes, we don't always know about it. And I think back to Texas. I can't remember when it
Texas
was, but where they
ice
had
storm, I believe.
It was the snowstorm, and they were very, very close to losing power. I think it was minutes or seconds away from. They had dipped to within the range, the frequency range that was very dangerous. So within the electricity network, you've got to maintain a near perfect balance of frequency, and the margin of deviation for that is very, very small.
Yes, otherwise the system rapidly
in order to protect
yes.
itself. And in Texas, they had dropped to within that margin, and it can only sustain that for a very short period of time. And they were in that margin, and they were going, and
this would have taken out the entire state electricity network.
Yes, it would have. So they were extremely close. And it's quite frightful when you think about that happening somewhere like Texas, which it's not an underdeveloped part of the world, and you wouldn't expect something like that to happen. I think that there's an assumption that I don't know, the resilience of the network means that these things never happen. Thankfully, we haven't had it happen in the UK. There was 1987. There was a huge storm. The hurricane came through.
I remember I was a child at that time. Yes.
Yeah, and at that point, we were the closest to it ever happening. But thankfully, it's not happened in the UK. But we've still got to be ready for it happening in the UK.
Absolutely.
So obviously, there is a huge amount of work within distribution network operators and at transmission level. Massive. We've got black start plans, and that's good. But one of the things that I'm always keen to talk about is what, within the system that we exist, we have society that is dependent on this, but also we have a collective response that we would have to put in place were we ever to be in this situation. I think it was Toronto experienced a black start event.
This is another ice storm.
A few years ago. I can't remember what caused it, but it was a few years ago that they had a black start event, and their response, and everybody reacted very calmly. People stayed at home. There wasn't any looting, and that's the sort of thing that we need to think about as a society in order to allow recovery from a scenario such as this. We need to have society play their part, which is a significant part in this. And what does the resilience of society, what can trigger chaos? And it would be things such as, and I actually played this out at work for our senior members of staff, and I had them all in a room. Well, obviously not all of us at the same time, but there were a large number of us in the room, and I was busy presenting, and I'd walk them through a bit of a live exercise, and I got all the lights switched off, and the presentation went dark. And I let them sit with it for a little bit, and I had a bit of role playing going on where the head of our operational head of our control center, received a call, obviously staged, saying that we were, and accelerated timescales quite a bit, saying we were in a black start type style event.
Okay.
And then I posed the question around the room, and I said, initially we would all just assume that this would be a power cut. Likewise, as a community, you would think if you were at work one day and the lights went out, you would just think it's a power cut.
Yeah, you think it'd be back in a few minutes maybe.
And when you realize it's not going to be, or your phone starts pinging, etc., and you realize that there's something bigger, you'll step out and you'll see the chaos in the streets. We won't have any traffic lights. We will have alarms that will be going off in buildings. Other people will be at various stages of knowing that something else is up. So you'll have a little bit of chaos and panic on the streets. You might need to think about how you're going to get home. Of course, trains and tubes are not going to work. Buses are not going to be operational. So you're either going to have to walk or catch a cab. Yeah. But if you have travelled into London and you don't live close, walking might not be an option for you.
For example, I live outside London, so if one happened here, yes, we'd be stuck.
Absolutely. And cabs are not going to, a lot of them are electric. A lot of them pay by card, so how many people actually have cash on them? And so that's a very real scenario that we need to sort of think about. How many of us actually carry cash around with us, and what would your plan be? I often like to encourage businesses to think about what would you do to support your staff in the event of that. Do you have some supplies of food and water that you stash somewhere for in case something like this happens? I don't know, a series of blankets that you need to then house everybody. But what do we do? Parents that have got children at school, young children at nursery school.
Suddenly you have the entire society sort of stops working. the entire sort of infrastructure, I guess, of society.
And then even once you're home, you've got things to think about there as well.
So how long would a large outage like this last, do you think? Could be hours, days?
We're expected to have up to 60% of the network able to be restored within 24 hours.
Okay.
So
in the worst case scenario, this would be.
However, in saying that, it's not as simple as flicking a switch and everything comes back on again. It's a very complex process and a very fine, delicate coming back to that frequency. In order to establish that, when you restore power back into the network, transmission and distribution work very closely together. And when you pass on sort of along, it's called the skeleton network, and you restore electricity to parts of that network, that frequency has to be basically perfect. Yes. And in order to do that, if it's not perfect, the whole thing fails. And so there is managing demand. When there is too much of a drawn demand, when you're trying to do that, it will disturb the frequency. So anybody that has, for example, tumble dryers that we're running, washing machines, TVs, lights.
If they all come on at once.
As with anything that's electrical, there is always a surge that requires more power when you start these things up than to maintain it. So when everything suddenly comes up, it's even if you can anticipate the demand for that time that you're going to try and reestablish that connection, there is always an allowance that you would have to give, which is something that we would do. However, this is where we talk about then societal resilience, communicating with society to say, in the event of this, do you know you need to switch off all of your electronics? Go around to all your plug switches, just switch them off. If you're not sure, you should just switch them off because you won't know what's on, what's not on.
And of course, if you've got things like heat pumps and so on now in the system, absolutely, and EV chargers, So you could have a situation for 24 hours, 60% of the network, and maybe
it's capable, but it's going to take a while to actually restore while we get that balance going and then reestablish connectivity.
So I guess this feels like obviously your organisation has a major part to play in this, but this is also civil society, it's government, it's local councils, it's hospitals, it's schools, it's and other networks, transport networks, water networks, because if you don't have any power, you don't have any water.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's is there sort of overarching resilience, I guess, committees, councils, organisations which actually bring together these sort of multi-vector issues?
Not at the moment. I think the discussions are had, certainly for us, we're having discussions where we have the opportunity to, with all of our key stakeholders, and we engage as much as what we possibly can. It's very important for individuals, and I think that I know that the government has released a resilience framework and that looks at ensuring and driving societal resilience, very largely within London, but then the rest of the UK as well. And it talks about shared understanding of risks, for example, and that comes back to that balance the system and understanding the part you play and how a risk that materializes impacts different parts of the system differently.
Yeah, of course.
And so it's that shared understanding. That's the concept of also prevention is better than cure. And so what does that actually look like for us? And there are a few other aspects within this framework that are very useful. And so I know that there is a resilience directorate within the Cabinet Office, and this is their job is to ensure that we are driving resilience in the focus. But there isn't one overarching body. I think the Business Continuity Institute is integrating resilience and has done so for the past few years into their topics and their conversation points, which is good. But I think it's still a developing discipline.
Yeah, because as you say, the world is becoming more volatile, both extreme weather events and man-made threats. We should all be more individually understanding, I think, of what we would do in these situations. So.
Absolutely. And one of the things, coming back to one of the points I made about it having these things, you understand resilience when it resonates with you. In order to do that, one of the things we do at work is we do a case study. So we'll look at incidents that happen around the world, and it's ideally not within our industry because I like to get the creative juices flowing, but we look outside of our industry to any crisis. So we looked at the post office. We've looked at the Titan submersible.
Oh, yes.
And you might look at that and think, especially in a company that's engineering based, they're going to love talking about component failure, etc. But actually, we looked at it from a culture piece. to understand how does the culture of an organization undermine the resilience of that organization, so much so that led to the implosion of that submersible. Despite there being multiple warnings and concerns about it, how does that happen?
Yeah, and that's very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the culture piece is something that we can all be talking about resilience. Obviously the challenge, so in looking at these case studies, the challenge back to everybody that we work with in the organization is always, it's interesting, but so what? What does that mean for you? If this was us, what is our equivalent to that? For the post office scandal, we looked at and we said, if we drew a comparison, if we had to imagine that we had all of our staff that submit timesheets and something was going wrong with the timesheets, would we turn that into a challenge where we didn't believe our staff telling us, or our employees telling us that there is a problem? And so we try to draw parallels and make it relevant to ourselves. And I think that that's a conversation that we really should be trying to have more so, to make people bring the impacts of a crisis forward so that we feel that now and we do what we can now to actually prepare.
Yeah, and I think understanding from absolutely bringing in ideas from other sectors is really important, because otherwise you can just be stuck in your silo again.
And you're going back into silo, exactly.
And you don't see something which someone else has already encountered and either succeeded or failed at, and often failed at, like in the Titan submersible or the post office situation.
Yeah.
So yes, well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I think a conversation close to a lot of people's hearts, because a lot of people, we rely so much on electricity that and even an hour or two wipes off hundreds of millions of dollars off the economy and can often endanger a lot of people's lives. So I'm glad that we've got people like you making sure that doesn't happen. So just before we finish, so where can people can people read more about your resilience strategies on the UK Power Network's website, or is this something you keep internal?
So at the moment, our strategies we keep internal, but I mean, if going onto the UK Power Network's website, so certainly where people are going to be impacted most will be during a power cut, and we set all of our support structures up and make it available on the website. So if people have access to the internet, going onto the website when they're affected by a power cut, they'll have everything that they need, all of the support. We do, as I say, as you know, we've got hundreds up to thousands of people ready to take calls in the event of major incidents, and so phoning the phone number as well will also get you results and support that you need.
And I guess if you are a vulnerable customer, there's information for how to maybe add yourself to your register? Or?
Yes, absolutely. That's on the website as well. And so it's the Priority Services Register, and you can add yourself onto that. But very often customers, we work very closely with our suppliers to ensure, as in electricity supply, to ensure that we are aware of who these customers are.
So
but it's worth checking.
Yeah.
They should, in theory, but it's always worth checking and ensuring that you're on and get the support that you need.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining you.
It was lovely
Thank you very much for joining us, Bronwyn.
It was lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Energy Futures podcast. Here at Energy Futures Lab, we are dedicated to addressing global energy challenges through pioneering research, innovation, and advocacy. To learn more about us and the exciting projects we are working on, visit our website and follow us on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest content.